Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 250 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to explore this question for yourself. I'm hoping the guests' musings, explorations, curiosities, and experiences will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 99th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Darcia Narvaez. Darcia is Professor Emerita of Psychology at the University of Notre Dame and Fellow of the American Psychology Association, American Educational Research Association, Association for Psychological Science, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She uses an interdisciplinary approach to studying evolved morality, child development, and human flourishing. Her most recent books include Restoring the Kinship Worldview and The Evolved Nest, Nature's Way of Raising Children and Creating Connected Communities. Her book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom, won the 2015 William James Book Award from the American Psychological Association and the 2017 Expanded Reason Award. Her recent short films, which there are links for in the notes, are Breaking the Cycle, The Evolved Nest, and Reimagining Humanity. She also serves as president of kindredworld.org. In this enlightening conversation, Darcia shares her path to creating the evolved nest, a concept that integrates insights from child development, parenting, and adult behavior. We discuss reconnecting with our natural rhythms, engaging with the world around us, fostering welcoming social environments, embracing play, and allowing both the spirit of children and adults to flow freely. This conversation is a wonderful invitation to reconnect with our primal wisdom, reflect on how we disconnect from it, and learn how to create the nurturing environments that we need to thrive. Look, I found this conversation to be so incredibly heart-opening, connecting, and insightful, and just packed full of wisdom. And I think it really gives a deeper line of inquiry or exploration into maybe why we feel at times so separate or competitive with each other. So if you take half as much from this conversation as I did, then you're going to be taking a lot from it. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. You can also check out the show notes below in order to follow so much more of Darcia's wonderful work. You can also find a link for the podcast newsletter where you can read about the reflections that these conversations you are listening to have evoked in me. And also for ways of contacting me, whether that's for individual coaching, leadership group coaching, or to join my weekly silent conversation groups, which are free and on Zoom. So that's all I have to say for this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 99th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Darcia, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Having become aware of your work this year, it's been rare that I've been as looking forward to a conversation as I am this one. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So as I have explained, Darcia, the first question that I start this off with is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Absolutely. And it started from my first memory that I hold consciously anyway. And that is what's wrong with the world. Because
Wow.
my earliest experience was of injustice towards a child. And my fault. I complained to my father about my older brother taking my toy, and my dad flew into a rage and beat him up in my recollection, and I was just shocked at the whole thing. And I spent also half my childhood outside the US, living in so-called developing nations mostly, and saw children my age on street corners selling gum instead of going to school like me, and they're in rags and barefoot and all. And I couldn't understand. Would be away for a year and then come back to the States for 2 years and then go away for a year and back and forth. And so it just was always a shock to see the distinction between the two kinds of ways of living, the wastefulness and overabundance in the States, and then the poverty. And so I looked at the superficial aspects of child injustice. And I've had multiple careers, and it took me a while to get back to the question of what's wrong with the world, because I was a music major in college and did music stuff and had my own business. I went to seminary to try to answer the question, but theology, at least in my fundamentalist kind of religion, was about original sin. That's what's wrong with the world, right? And that was so unsatisfying. So it took me a while to get back, and I went into science. I could keep talking here. I was raised fundamentalist, and fundamentalists don't like science or business. At least I, was trained to mistrust the world of Caesar, and to not want, intellectuals are suspicious and all this stuff. Well, I ended up doing all of that. The science of moral development is what captured my attention, and I got a PhD in that area.
Wow, what a question to begin with from a young age.
Yeah.
Just and even the first example there, even with seeing how your father responded to you, suggest or saying that your toy was taken. How has that stayed with you? Like, has that shaped a lot of your inquiries? Like that seems like quite a strong impression.
Yeah, it's, we all have some trauma in our background, especially in the modern world where we routinely undercare for children and traumatize them just from the beginning, from even during pregnancy. Mothers are stressed out, and that stresses the baby. And then birth practices, medicalized birth, is very traumatic in many ways, typically. And so, that those, being sensitized to trauma experiences of others and my own, as a witness mostly, that, and then you get sensitized in general, that follows you throughout life, right? Which is a good thing if you use it as a gift, a way to uh, shape your gift to the world. And so I think that's where I am now, trying to help people realize that we have a way of raising the young, the evolved nest, that people have forgotten. And we don't have to be so miserable as we are if we return to our ancestral wisdom.
Can you give me just explain the sense of the evolved nest? It's something I find absolutely beautiful, your work around this. So if you wouldn't mind just
Sure.
explaining that a little bit.
Yeah, let me just say, when I got my PhD in moral development area, the field, and still does, focuses on thinking and reasoning, as if that's what makes humans special. That's been a Western philosophy orientation for some centuries, and if you just think like a moral philosopher, sophisticatedly, and then you apply that to your action with your will, then, wow, you're a good person, right? Uh, and I grew up, because it was a harsh family environment, grew up with easily frozen brain. I would panic. My brain would just go into a panic state if I was put on the spot, which happened in high school on speech class, with an impromptu speech. I was supposed to, you pick a piece of paper out with a topic, and mine was the mop. I said one thing about a mop, and then I stood there and turned multiple colors because, I didn't think of, anyway. And that plagued me, this inability to apply my will in the
Yeah.
way that, if you think about the right thing to do and you're frozen, well, there's something wrong with that. And so I was working in the area with reasoning and doing experiments and such, but found that very unsatisfying, and was reading widely and found neuroscience and affective neuroscience and clinical science and developmental neuroscience and anthropology. In anthropology, they've examined, how children are raised in hunter-gatherer societies around the world. That's where we spent our human genus spent 99% of our history in these kinds of societies, small bands, nomadic foragers. 95% as a species. We've been around for about 300,000 years, but Otherwise, our genus 2 million years. And the characteristics then they identified were what I now call the evolved nest. And we've expanded it a bit from their list because it was male anthropologists making the list. So they didn't look at birth, and they didn't include in their listing of, how to raise a child, some other things. So we have 9 components that we've looked at in my lab. And so I can go through the list. Yeah.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So the first one is soothing perinatal experiences. And that means prenatal, your experience in the womb. Actually, we can't measure this, but of course, your parents coming together and conceiving you and bringing their history into that is part of this, but we don't measure that. It's impossible to know how loving the coupling was at that moment of conception, but we can look at the effects on the child, the fetus, during pregnancy. And so we know that if there's the mother's stressed a lot, and that means mostly socially stressed, racism and such, the baby will develop a stress reactive brain. The stress response will be hyperactive. That also happens from things after birth as well. But so you want to have the mother feeling supported so that the biochemistry is a growth orientation and not the stress orientation that actually impedes growth and also misdevelops things. And then birth experience. So this is all under number 1. Birth experiences should be soothing as well, which you follow the rhythms of the mother and child and the baby. The baby decides when it wants to leave the womb, and they vary. The decision making, how long babies stay in the womb, varies by 55 days. So
Wow.
how does a doctor know? Oh, this is the due date. It's like, and yet in medicalized birth, they force babies out on the due date, and they do it in a certain amount of time to save money instead of following the natural rhythms, which can take several days of mom and baby getting used to the new relationship and baby kind of moving forward out of the in the vaginal canal a little bit and then moving back and then moving forward. The rhythm. It's almost like a sexual rhythm, right? Back and forth. And that is what the mom and baby's bodies do is they provide the hormones to make it not so painful if you're following, the instincts the mother will have, her animal instincts, to move around and things. And they mobilize all these hormones to get through that. And then what should happen then postnatally, which is also under number 1, is soothing experience after birth, which means the baby crawls up the belly of the mother, manipulates the nipple to get the milk going, and they're mobilizing hormones to get through the birth experience now calm down. And their reward systems of their bodies are ready to just body meld forever deeply with one another. They're ready for that in those first few hours after birth, so they need alone time and such. And what we do is we interfere with all that, and then the mobilizing hormones stay high in the baby. The baby's going to cry for months and sleep and cry and sleep, and everyone thinks, oh, babies cry, you can't do anything about it. And so you've set up a trajectory for ill health. That's number 1. Number 2,
Can
yes,
I
go
can I
ahead.
just yeah,
Yeah,
please. I just think that there's even the terms there you use like animal instincts and there's a natural rhythm to this. It seems like there's so much that we seem to do to not feel aligned with our natural selves.
yeah,
And not just in this aspect of life, but in many other areas that I've looked at. But those are the first things that kind of jump out at me when you're saying this. Just what, like, if we're wanting to feel like we belong in this life, this earth, whatever it may be, it's kind of so interesting just from what you're pointing to, how we could already be destabilizing a natural rhythm from even before we appear.
that's right. That's right. And that's the unfortunate um, shift in the last, millennia, since the ancient Greeks, sort of, and even before that a bit, and then especially in the last few hundred years with the Western Enlightenment perspective that, oh, bodies, that's inferior, nature's inferior, it's the mind that matters, and, ignore all that and just control it all. It's
Yeah.
what McGilchrist calls the left brain orientation, although the more sophisticated neuroscience would argue with that term. But something happens where you get very narrowly focused and you can't appreciate the living dynamism of life. It's just a flow. We're in and out of being this way or that way, and that's fine. But this other focus, so-called left brain, is unable to deal with that. It can't deal with living beings and flexibility. Once things categorized and set into their own ways of being, and not flexibility. No, I like dead things, right? Static things. That's the culture. The dominant culture is killing us because it doesn't understand if you've only functioned from that part of the brain. And when you're undercared for, that means the lack of the evolved nest, you are undermining this so-called right hemisphere way of being, which is the flow and the receptive intelligence, social and emotional intelligence to get along with all of life. No, you undermine that and you enhance the innate survival systems, which are panic and rage and fear, and because you leave babies in distress, those systems then dominate. They take over. The stress response takes over. The blood flow shifts to the muscles to run away or fight, and so you can't think very well, and you just want to latch on to an answer immediately. Black and white thinking, right? So we're making people that way. We were kind of shifting human nature with the undercare that begins at the beginning.
Darcia, you have the capacity to just make my heart feel like it's open and singing as you're speaking here. So I shall,
Oh, good.
I shall ask you to, if you wouldn't mind carrying on with some of these,
Sure.
the list. This would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm glad. It's kind of bad news, but good news, right? So, yeah, number two then is breastfeeding. Every animal's milk, we're mammals because we breastfeed. That's what it means. It refers to, and every milk of every animal is different. Ours is very thin, lots of lactose in it, and needs to be ingested frequently. So a newborn needs to almost have it almost constantly, or many, many times during the first hour. Their stomachs are very tiny, and the milk is just flooding the brain and the body with the hormones needed to build health in various ways, including in the brain. Morning milk is different from evening milk. Morning milk, when you breastfeed directly, is energizing, and evening milk is calming. It has tryptophan. It's a precursor of serotonin, and serotonin is a key neurotransmitter, a neuropeptide in the brain that is linked to intelligence and not being depressed. So you want more of that. You want the brain to be really well functioning so that you don't have these deficits later. Breast milk is also a kind of a science laboratory. Mother's breasts are. If there's an infectious agent in the region, she'll develop an antibody for it and deliver it through the milk supply. If the baby's in a growth spurt, there'll be more fat in the milk. So it's just this magical elixir. And the anthropologists, ethnographers have observed that our ancestral context, the hunter-gatherer civilization, nomadic foragers tend to range from 2.5 years to 4 years of breastfeeding. Now, some of that later years is night milk, and then you want to keep the night milk going again because of the brain development aspects. But yeah, it's like, what? Are you kidding me? Everyone in the Western world goes, "Wow, you got," and their mind explodes over 4 years. But the immune
Yeah.
system takes about that long to develop to adult levels, even longer. So they've observed even longer than that, 8 years breastfeeding. And boys need everything more. They need more of the evolved nest because they mature much slowly by about 2 years until age 30 or so, right? And it's by a few months in babyhood, but and they have less built-in resilience than girls do, and they are more easily toxically stressed by social humiliation. So you want to be much more nurturing with boys. You protect them more. They're more fragile sex. Otherwise, they get stuck in these survival systems that are innate. The fear, rage, the control, all the black and white thinking that I was mentioning earlier, and they just go into a dominance orientation to the world, dominant submission. and they carry that forward. So you want to really nurture boys well. That includes breastfeeding.
Well, that's just even as you're saying that though, like the miracle or the intelligence of nature, like just the difference in the morning milk and the night milk, like as you're describing that, I'm just going, wow, like how would we even attempt to interfere with this given kind of how our interferences generally tend to go?
Right. Yeah, and infant formula came about in the States anyway, when we had a lot of immigrants who had babies but had to go to work or didn't bring their extended families with all the wise elders with them. And so they started feeding their babies oatmeal or something and making them sick and killing them. And so scientific formula started to be invented, and the American Academy of Pediatrics got established in part for this. They used to have formula labs around for people to go get some. Yeah. So formula is good for an emergency, if there's for whatever reason, but otherwise, it's so inadequate. It has the same flavor. Breast milk changes with whatever the mother's diet is, expanding the palate, of the child to be more flexibly, can eat multiple things that are, of course, related to their culture. Yeah. So.
I don't usually conduct these interviews and going through a list, but I must say, when I've listened to you speak before, I just find so much of this just, I don't know, fundamentally important and aligns with so much of what I tend to explore in terms of what is a good life. So if you'd continue to humor
Okay.
me, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for listening. All right. The third one is a welcoming social climate, which sort of I mentioned that with pregnancy and gestation. So the mother feels like she is supported, that the baby is wanted, the baby feels wanted, the baby is encouraged to flourish, to open up and unfold their uniqueness. So there's not interference in their development. You're not punishing or isolating or distressing them. You are, supporting, giving whatever they need. And it's the first 4 or 5 years are rather needy. And then they're ready to be a community member and do their own things. So they become very independent with the evolved nest provision. If you don't provide the evolved nest, they're going to be very insecure. They won't feel confident. They will feel, needy because you've forced their orientation, their attention to the outer world. It wasn't welcoming, so they have to go, ooh, it's not a safe place, right? And you, as a baby, then have to mobilize your own efforts, which you don't have. You need co-regulation by the others. You can't regulate yourself. You're just a little naive little thing. Babies are our species. Infants at birth resemble fetuses of other animals until at least 2 years. So they need an external womb experience. They need to have their needs met quickly, just as in the womb, and to be kept calm while their systems are deciding how to grow and what their parameters will be and what their thresholds for activation will be, like the stress response. So welcoming climate is really important in a general way. We also all need all these other components of the nest throughout our lives. We all need to feel like we matter, like we belong, like we have something to contribute, that people appreciate us.
Isn't it just incredible though, like just how not like even just obvious that this sounds as well. And then what and I'll generalize just by saying the West, but the things that we've sacrificed in order to not prioritize this. And then the kind of shock that we have that this culture or societies are kind of making us sick and still kind of going along with it. It kind of, and then we look for fixes almost like as you've described at the start through almost the rational mind, like how can I do more self-development and have agency over my reaction to things and all of these things, which to some extent can have some interesting insights for sure, but it seems that we've missed like almost the roots of our existence, even just in what you're describing so far.
Yeah, I like the way you're putting it. In a way, our baselines for what's normal have shifted, downshifted. We accept whatever it is as, oh, that's the way it is. It's
Yeah.
the collateral effects of progress. We're making progress, and I'm sorry you're depressed and anxious, but we're having progress. And then we assume that having that children who are aggressive, adults who are self-centered, that's normal. That's just human nature. So we rationalize. Again, the rational brain rationalizes what it really doesn't understand, but wants to keep going with its model of abstracting models that are kind of unrealistic.
Yeah. The sense that this is just human nature. Um, I know I've read a paper a long time ago by Heinrich, who came up with that weird acronym or whatever, and just said that we're quite an outlier in the West versus other cultures.
Yeah.
What are, with all the the extensive research you've done in your practice, like when did you start to become acutely aware that this isn't human nature? Perhaps this is just really a consequence of how we're doing things.
I think you're asking, you kind of broke up. You're asking, when do we become aware? Is
Oh,
that what you
when
said?
did you become
Oh,
aware
when did I?
specifically? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I knew growing up that things were quite wrong and would question and I knew that I was quite, a good student, so I was in the rational mind. But I think I had people encounters, relationships of gifts of people reaching out to me and then opening up my eyes. Like I had, I accompanied, so I was a music major in college, but I didn't want to be a music teacher, classroom teacher at the time. And I just accompanied my friend on a couple different summer workshops on education through music, which is a folk song game orientation to teaching music. So you play games like a hunting we will go, a hunting we will go, we'll catch a little fox and put him in a box and then we'll let him go. And you're holding hands and you're looking at each other and you're smiling, you're laughing, you're singing, your vagus nerve is going, and now I know. But that kind of, whoa, this is fun. And I ended up teaching music, classroom music in the Philippines at a international school there. And then as I moved through my various careers, I brought that orientation of singing and playfulness to my business. I taught Spanish. I had a business teaching Spanish using super learning to adults, and we used visualization and singing and playing and things. And then in my teaching at the university level for the last 30 years or so, I brought in the folk song games also to get the kids who are so depressed now, the college students, to find ways to embrace joy, social joy. And so there's just been different experiences like that kind of made me aware that we don't have to be in these miserable life ways. There are alternatives, and all the reading I do and the traveling and all have really been very helpful. So sometimes it's strangers who reach out and say something to you, and it's like, oh, wakes you up, right? So
Yeah.
we're all in this soup of oneness, and not isolated little beings that are little robots, but we are being impacted all the time by the birds and the bees and the trees and everything. And so to be open, to open your heart to that, to be um unafraid at life growing you all the time.
There's I think there's such an interesting dynamic as well, that even when we try to make ourselves feel better, it's more through ideas of flaws and frailties and shadow, and it is almost like there seems to be so little focus on like engaging with joy, like engaging with the simple sense of joy, which can be so, I don't know, easily transmuted between people, shared, cultivated, created. And that when you do experience those moments of joy, like they bring such a stark contrast, I think, to some of the inquiries that seem to only further kind of attract you to your suffering or to figure out your suffering, you know?
Yeah, to analyze it.
Completely. If you wouldn't mind just carrying on then to
Sure.
number 4, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to what we list as number 4 and go to 5, which is play,
Wow.
social free play. And that, is part of what I was just talking about. That, and what we know about play is it's turning on all sorts of genes that are related to health and control of your aggressive mood orientations. Because when you're playing with your partner, and you see this with cats or dogs that are playing with puppies or kittens that are playing, and one of them will go, that the other one's biting too hard, and the partner then has to release and not be so aggressive, or else you stop playing, right? Your partner will give up on you. So you have to learn how to, coordinate and deal with the unexpected reactions of the other. And it's so good for executive functions, the ability to stop and start action, to kind of predict what might happen in the future, have some empathy, all that kind of thing. So play is just a restorative practice, and I always recommend it for those who were not nested growing up, to go ahead and play. Find a child 0 to 6 and play with them. And you have to be in the present moment. You have to react and be, back and forth and take turns and all this stuff, or else they stop playing with you. But when you're in that moment, according to the research by Alan Shore, your right hemisphere is growing. Your ability to get along, that was maybe underdeveloped and there's therapists who say that these couples who have empty nests come into for therapy, and because they can't agree on things, their kids have gone to college or left on their own, and the woman's ready to see the world, and the guy just wants to go into his man cave and isolate and just be kind of static. And the analysis is that it's the right hemisphere of the men that it was underdeveloped. So what do? You do something where you have to be in the present moment. How do you, learn ballroom dancing, learn, art, where you have to be in some fashion present, emotionally present, right? And especially good with other people. So,
When you say that, and you just think of, and I don't want to turn this into something just lamenting modern society or something, but when you think about presence, the use of technology, when you think of just how seriously we do things, and I'd even say like a lack of experimentation. You've mentioned over the course of your life moving directions, changing careers, even sometimes how we just latch onto an idea that we may have committed to in our early 20s and say that I have to stick at this now. It, it just, the contrast of your aliveness or what you're pointing to seems to be so stark in terms of the staticness in which people, even the life path that we may take. It's, I don't know, it just gives me a real felt sense of, oh God, we're just containing this too much. It's no wonder why something so natural feels so foreign.
yeah. Yeah. In my life, every 8 to 10 years, it was like the rug was pulled out. It's like, oh, I guess that was all confused. That was worldview doesn't make any sense anymore, right? And it's like, oh, all right. Now what do we do? Okay, then you have to regroup, right? But my middle name is Faith, Faye, and I think that's part of it. That it to believe that life is for you, that the universe loves you, Mother Earth loves you, right? And so
Yeah.
trust the flow. And in my 2014 book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, I contrast indigenous wisdom, which I call primal wisdom, with Western wisdom traditions of Christianity. And they agree on multiple things, like you have to be open to divine energies, the energies of the universe to flow into you, which means you have to let go of ego, you have to let go of fear, you have to be in a state of love. So wisdom is a state of being, right? So you have to, some people have to work at that because we're all kind of against the world. You can't be bracing against the world. You have to be open and flowing. And the two aspects that distinguish the two kinds of wisdom. One is your compassion that you develop through these processes of wisdom, states of wisdom, is for the Western Christian tradition towards human beings. For the indigenous or kinship or primal wisdom, it's all life. You have
Right.
compassion for all of life, wherever you are, right? And then the other one is the Western wisdom tradition is fearful of the animal nature. I think this is because they've undercared for babies for so long. Babies seem so selfish. Original sin was invented by Saint Augustine when he thought about himself as a baby wanting his mother's breast. Oh, original sin. I mean, it's all right. So animal nature. Oh no. Whereas in the indigenous wisdom, primal wisdom, kinship wisdom, you want to embrace your animal nature, right? You want to help it unfold, because it is so wise. The animal mind is so wise. This Tamarack song has some wonderful books to help develop that part of you.
Yeah, I just mentioned to you before, I hosted a conversation on wildness just before jumping on here. And it's so beautiful to see people connect with a sense of nature, of their own nature, of some sense of wildness, but in a reverence for wildness, not in a fear and mistrust of it. And like it's so clear when you look at how we're structured and how forward thinking we are in terms of mitigating potential future problems, like just how much we just do not trust either ourselves or the unfolding of life. Like it's kind of staggering, if you just sit back from it and just let go of some of what you perceive to be the cultural messaging or how one, in air quotes, should live life. It seems quite staggering, to be honest.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of like taking the butterfly of life and crushing it to have control, right? I mean, it's like crazy.
Oh yes.
So I'll go on.
Yes, please.
So the next one is affectionate touch. So we all need this too. And that in babyhood, that means 24/7, pretty much. You're carried and held on the back and the front, whatever, and you're there with others. And that's going to then regulate all sorts of things: your breathing, your vagus nerve, your stress response, all your heart rate. And so that means safe bed sharing, which also supports breastfeeding, and just being in arms. And in the studies that have been done with hunter-gatherer groups, usually it's less than 50% of the time is the mother the one that's carrying the child. It's other nurturers, right? So it's usually father, grandmother, sometimes an older member of the older child member of the community. So we know we have all sorts of evidence, animal studies especially, on how important touch is. And then no negative touch. So there's no punishment in these societies. You never isolate a baby. You never spank children. I mean, this is unless the baby's rolling into the fire or something, then you pull them out. But otherwise, you stand back, because you understand that there's a unique spirit in that child, and if you interfere with that inner compass unfolding and guiding them towards life and growth, you are going to harm them. You're going to, and we know this, right? Because once you start punishing a child, they become externally focused. Oh, I have to, be careful because mom might hit me or dad might hit me or whatever it is, right? Then they lose the connection to their inner spirit, their inner unfolding.
That is that's a staggeringly beautiful observation, just from the point of view of that inner spirit. And so much, I think, of our external comparison stems from the fact that we've disconnected from an inner sense of spirit, that we've got an inner voice or an inner compass to guide us through life. And when you describe that there, it seems so clear that there's to interfere with the child at this point is to disturb their own connection almost, or their own internal almost like even a resilience too, right? Like
Yeah,
because now they're scanning externally, that seems more fearful than trusting what's within.
that's right. That's right. It's a good way to put it. Yeah. And so another one of the nest components is responsive relationships. And responsiveness means you are providing enough support, but you're not interfering, right? And you're keeping the baby calm in the early years. You don't make leave them alone. You don't leave them to cry. Sleep training is a horror. I've had parents ask me. I've written about it quite a bit on blog posts, but parents will email and say, "Well, thank you for your message, but the sleep training clinic told me to sleep train my 6-week-old baby." Now remember, this is a fetus. Like, oh my God. And she said I was supposed to leave the baby alone all night. So I went in, I ate 12 hours later, baby's covered in vomit. It's amazing the baby's still alive, right? I mean, this is extreme stress. And yet another father said, well, we were doing the evolved nest kind of treatment of our baby for 3 months, but my wife had to go back to work, and so they told us to sleep train and just turn the dryer on so you don't hear the crying. And he said, I couldn't take it. I'm sitting here now against the dryer holding my baby. What do I do? So uh, this insanity of control and the minimization of babies' needs, right? So what's happened in the lingo, even in developmental psychology, oh, it's genetic. Babies are resilient. You have to train them to be independent. All wrong. It's all wrong. And we have the neuroscience, but people don't want to hear it, in part because in the States in particular, women have had to go back to work to maintain the standard of living since the 70s. And so the whole discourse is shifted to justify non-mothering, non-nurturing, because you got to work and everything's so hard for families in the States. It's a horrible place to raise a baby. It's the worst in the world unless you're in a war zone, I think. And yet it's all justified. Again, the slip baselines, and the minimization of our humanity, because it's all about work, 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 and keeping the system going, right? Capitalism.
How do you like everything you're saying? I have a 15-month-old. It's our first child, my daughter, and that's why even a lot of times when you're describing things, even in a future pace sense, I'm just like, it's almost getting a moistness in my eyes because
Hmm.
just the process that's unfolding in front of me. And like, I agree with what you're saying, right? And it's much of it has been quite informative for me, or quite telling, in terms of how my wife and I are approaching these things. What is there for people to, where they are coming up against an economic reality, for people that do come up against an economic reality of they have to pay for rent or whatever it may be, like what is available to people in terms of this, like, because when you're describing some of those things there, it seems like such a, I don't know, such a difficult thing to impose upon a child. And it is amazing how much in our culture these things have been normalized. And when you're speaking, I'm like, well, Jesus, that sounds, that poor father with the child in his arms next to a drying machine because they had to go back to work. Like, what are you kind of noting in some of the experiences that you're being informed of, or what, even what's possible, I guess?
Yeah, that's the big challenge because the the way the economics and the social policies and the practices in the states are just going against nurturing, period, of any age, but
Yeah.
especially babies. So you really have to take up your more. I wrote a blog called named "Having a Baby is like." Planning for a baby maybe was is like climbing Mount Everest, and so you have to make all these plans, right? A lot of parents don't. It's accidental pregnancy and all that too, but today you almost have to. understand the evolved nest components, and then try to set up your life to support as much as possible. And a lot can be healed through play, through safe bed sharing for years, and that touch, lots of cuddling and touch for the child, and listening. The welcoming social climate is also about listening and being there without judgment, and being in that space together, where you honor the life of the child, the inner spirit. But of course, ideally, you have the extended family nearby, the wise, nurturing people. Not every extended family's that way. Wise elders, the grandparents, the baby boomers who are retiring. Come on, baby boomers, we need you. Come, be nurturers. The whole world needs you to do that, right? Ideally, you have that. Ideally, you have neighborhoods where kids can go out and play freely. In the States, a lot of neighborhoods, you can't let them out.
Yeah.
So all the different components, try to figure out how you can do it. We have an Evolved Nest curriculum, a self-directed curriculum you can download, and has all sorts of links to podcast videos, our little films, and then it asks you, well, how can you apply this in your own life? And are you nested yourself? And some suggestions
Yeah.
for that. So we all need to learn to nest ourselves so we can help others nest.
Yeah, that's I love even just what you said there about the capacity of play to balance things out as well. Like what a gorgeous idea,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
we don't have to go more into suffering. We have to learn how to reconnect more with joy, and I'm
Yes.
not, once again, I'm not disavowing or the notion of reflection and inquiry around
Right.
trauma or whatever it may be, but just that we need more play. Could you please carry on?
Yeah. So three more. One
Yeah.
is allo parents, allo mothers, other nurturers. So all these components are not intended to be provided by mother alone, which is what the patriarchal system has assumed for some time, that it's the mother in the household, raising the children, and the father's out there as the breadwinner. This is not our species' normal way of being. It's too hard. It's my mother needs support too, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, who decided this? So all the things, the touch, the holding, the caring, the touching, the play, the welcoming, all of it, the responsiveness. We all need mentors throughout life. So that's our responsive relationships, our other nurturers, even strangers, as I mentioned, can be nurturing to our, inner spirit. My husband always tells a story of being getting something at a gas station when he was a youth in the maybe 60s, and he started a conversation with a driver there, and they started talking about Marx and other philosophical things, and the guy ended up saying, "You should go to college." And he had never thought about going to college because he grew up in a steel worker family in Pittsburgh, and that was the spark that helped him become a professor eventually. So this, you can always be a spark for someone else's joy, for their spiritual development, for their, well-being. So let's enhance one another.
Sometimes when I look at life and I might get a little bit, not pessimistic because for some reason I just feel very optimistic about humans. But when someone just points to something like that, just something what could be so insignificant, the person may not even realize they've done that. And it can have such a profound influence on another human being just by willing to be that spark, to uplift somebody, to offer guidance. I don't know. It's moments like that that will probably keep me eternally optimistic.
Yes, yes, me too. So there's two more. One is nature, immersion, and connection. So we co-evolved with the natural world to, know this landscape where I am, to be familiar and partner with the trees, the animals, the plants, the waterways, and the soil. And this is all us together. And to be able to shape shift into taking their perspective, right? This perspective of the beaver, the bear, and so on, uh, and the spider. Um, and not, being that dominator mind. I call it the conquistador mind. My husband is kind of traditional and likes to have a lawn, green lawn, and I've persuaded him in the last number of years to not mow in May, because the insects are still, getting their lives together, and it's actually better not to mow at all. But at least I convinced him of that, and I said, you got to put on your partnership mindset, not your conquistador mindset. You know, you've got enough of that, right? And I have conquistador heritage too, because I'm Puerto Rican and Spanish and all that. But yeah, so anyway, nature connection, really important to feel, bonded to earth. It's part of
Yeah.
who we are. And you need lots of experiences outside, finding a sit spot where you go to regularly. And then over time, your senses will open up more and more. This is John Young's Coyote's Guide to Nature Connection. And then you also are going to be welcomed more by the animals. If this is a wild place, they'll start to appear to you. So
This is, I think there's something profoundly important about this in terms of anyone's relationship with the world. And I think even in observing even simple things in a city, observing the leaves falling, decaying, coming, blooming again in the spring, like even for the cycles of life,
yes,
even contemplations around death, and maybe, or even just awareness of this, like
yeah,
it makes so many things just seem more natural, let alone, the effect of sitting in a forest sometime. And
yeah,
I can honestly swear that I feel something in me like regulating, or like just
hmm,
there's there's a peace that comes without a deliberate attempt to acquire
yeah,
peace.
yep, yep,
And I don't know, I even just, I guess, when I think of some of our modern cities, and even the looks of the architecture of some of the buildings, and everything's kind of square and the grids, and there's so much order on top of what's a kind of a pulsing, vibrating, living earth. Once
yeah,
again, that sense of connection with earth, with the world around us, the planet, we seem to deliberately fall out of connection. Like we have to make an
yeah,
effort to fall out. So many of the things you're pointing to, there's a point where we make a decision where we almost fall out of connections with ourselves. You mentioned with their inner spirit,
hmm,
with the rhythms of
yeah,
life. Like it's, and then, as you said, just we can think of this as a natural. This is just how humans are, but it's quite clear from when you're talking there. There's so many moments where we're actually making deliberate efforts not to be connected to that natural rhythm.
yes, yes, brilliantly put. Yes, love it. Yeah, we've disconnect babies from the beginning, right? Once you
Yeah,
separate the baby from the mother at birth, you've now planted seeds of disconnection. The child is, you broke the continuum of life, right? And then the hospital ways of treating babies are brought home, their own room, their own bed. This is scheduled feeding or whatever. That's all disconnection completely, right? Whereas it should be constant, 24/7 connection. But we plant that, and then that seems normal. So we had we did an experiment a few years ago. It got published on kind of nudging people towards nature connection. We called it eco attachment, and our some of well the 28 we have 28 days of eco attachment dance that's based on this experiment that worked, where in that experiment the college students came to the lab, did a pretest, learned about how important nature connection is. Through poetry, an essay, some facts, and then they, in that condition, and then they got to pick from 40 some activities, uh, and they picked 21, put them in an envelope, and left. And every day for 3 weeks, they picked out one of those things to do. So pay attention to the clouds today. Acknowledge the trees you walk by, because we knew they were all on campus. And then they came back and did the post test, and they increased in their ecological mindfulness, their ecological empathy. And so this eco attachment dance set of 28 nudges is based on that. We all need the nudging, right? Throughout the day. Just like you said, pay attention to the leaves falling, pay attention to the dandelion in the crack in the sidewalk, right? Whatever it's, pay attention to life around you. The spider, say hello to the spider. Or this fly, don't smash them. Just say hi, good
Yeah.
to see you.
Yeah, it's by the way, that idea of the dandelion through the crack, I think that's as an image that came into my mind, it's such a beautiful kind of metaphor, I think, for human life trying to strive in or thrive in some of our cultures, if you know what I mean. Like it's almost seems in spite of it. Just the final one. I think you said we had skipped one earlier. Yeah.
Uh, I went back to that one, but the final one is restorative healing practices, regular ones. So the San people in Africa, when John Young has asked them, and others asked them, how often do you have a healing practice? Oh, maybe once a week. And that means dancing and singing and drumming and, being, all connected around the fire and people crying and whatever, and, healers having their hands on people. And then they said, well, but if there's grieving to do every day. So just think how much we could use that every day. There's so much to grieve about now, right? But we also need the joy, the communitas, the being together with others is so healing. Heals our mental imbalances, our physical imbalances, our relational imbalances. All get restored because we get easily out of balance as human beings. Yeah.
The sense of almost consciously grieving something, I think, is something that's greatly missing. In terms of even just the small things, I've mentioned before, even sometimes my wife, grieving a stage in our daughter's development that has passed now. Do you know what I mean? Like not in the sense that she's just absolutely distraught, but I just really love that. Like just an awareness that something has gone, and I think I when I heard her say that, I felt that to be quite a subtle observation. And then it also made me think then of all the other things that we probably grieve that we're never even aware of, like even if it's our own potential or an opportunity that came along, or let alone some kind of harrowing events that we're often aware of around the world as well. Like just a
Yeah.
deliberate or a conscious like grieving of the pain that we're experiencing, I think is I don't know, it seems to be very lacking.
Yeah, I think what we can do is just have ceremony, even each day or each week, where we acknowledge what have we lost, or what's the next phase we're moving into, and have some candle lighting, or some write a little slip of paper, or tie a ribbon, or do something to acknowledge the process of just living, right? You're always
Yeah.
letting go. You're always, finding new things and then letting go of the old. And we all need to honor that. Even gratitude, before eating, thanking all the creatures that have sacrificed themselves, willingly or not, to feed you. And to be
Yeah.
here, the glass of water, to thank water, the water of life. We wouldn't be here without it. The air, all of it. We need more than our legs or arms, as Jack Forbes said. Who am I? Well, I am, an earthling. I'm part of Earth. And so let's be grateful to what Earth provides all day long. Everything around us is from Earth, the plastic, the paper, everything. So.
Has there been a moment of connection or union with the earth in as you've moved along through your own life that is kind of, and I maybe there are many, so I'm not looking for a list or anything, but just the like a moment where you've almost kind of been staggered by the connection that one can possibly feel in being in kind of union with nature or union with the world around us.
Well, what comes to mind is the loss of old oak trees on our property. They start to fall apart, and then just to lose their presence. And yet, uh, one of them happened when we were out of town for a week, and so we just had the fellow who helps us with tree trimming come, and he took it down, and because it was across the road and falling again into our yard and all, and he just ground up the stump. Well, we had another one last year fall apart and cross the road in the middle of the night, which we didn't hear, but our neighbor did. And he brought in the police officers, and then they called the county. The county didn't come. So the police officers had brought chainsaws and they cut up the stuff across the street. And we never heard anything. I wear earplugs at night, but and in the morning, yeah, there it was. But we left the stump this time. And now this year, there's a new tree growing out of the stump, and it is
Wow.
so beautiful. Oak, it's red leaves now, and it's just so heartening to know that life is still there, our partner is still there, our kin is still with us.
There's moments that I've had since maybe connecting more with myself through meditation or various lines of inquiry, or just even just sitting and observing the world, where I felt compelled just to hug trees. And
Hmm.
I
Me
think
too.
there's some, yeah, but I think there's something so fundamental to my sense of belonging in this world. When, as you said, like the sphere of connection goes even well beyond just human beings, and just to incorporate all of life. And I don't know, even just that story there, just what you can learn about just even just there still being life within this oak tree, essentially. I think there's something, even in a metaphorical sense, there's something just really beautiful about that. Look, just given all that we've discussed, Darcia, and all that you pointed to in terms of even spirit, connection, nurturing, nest, play, listening, um, and then also pointing to a lot of the obstacles that we face that we kind of pull us out of that rhythm, pull us out of that nature, all of these things. Be really curious to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
Yes. Well, I think it varies by person, but in general, I would think that it has to do with harmonizing with the flow of life. And that requires then that your mental or cognitive function, your thinking mind, your ego consciousness coordinates with your heart mind, your heart spirit, and your gut. And it takes some work to coordinate those things since we got so dysregulated from all the undercare. And then when you're coordinated, you can come to each situation with a flow of heart centered uh, reaction or be action or behavior, where you can enhance the life, the life form in front of you, and not be caught in fear, and not be caught in anger or resentment, and not wanting to control them, but to create the interpersonal dance, this unique time with them in every new moment. And so there's that orientation within the individual, but then also to use your abstract thinking about possibilities to be inclusive in the same way. So you're applying your what I call the social engagement, receptively attuned, flexible um, orientation to others, and your orientation to, how do you apply things outside this present moment, is then rooted in that sense of oneness, that sense of communalism, that sense of flow of spirit. How do we help spirit flow? How do we help people thrive? How do we help all the non humans thrive as well, and move into the future? So, this is what traditional indigenous communities were about. They enhanced one another, and then they knew that they were part of this whole flowing cosmos.
That's that's just really beautiful. The sentiment of helping spirit flow is definitely something that I think will stay with me and accompany me for quite some time, as will so much of what you've shared today. So I just want to say one final time, thank you so much for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast today. It's been such a joy and so enlightening and enlivening. So I'm very grateful for your time today.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Mark, for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation. Your heart is there, and I love knowing you this way. It'd be nicer in person, but this is marvelous. So thank you.